I will say, one of the things I heard most often is you don't have to have a law degree to work in policy. That is true. I do find that it's been beneficial in terms of just the academic experience, that you get as in law school. Just you see things, I think, in a different way. So I think it's been super valuable. But yeah, so then I started looking at those programs. I ultimately applied to several, but I wanted to stay in the St. Pete, Tampa Bay area. And that's why I ultimately decided on the Stetson USF program. So I actually continued to work in the lab while I was in school. So I did I did my first year of law school, and then I did my master's. I did 42 credit hours, I believe, in 1 year. I don't recommend that. And I think that was part of because they were still trying to figure out the structure of the joint degree program at the time. So I think it's been worked out since then. And then I finished my last 2 years of law
Welcome to
school.
Public Health Careers. I'm your host, Omari Richards, founder of the Public Health Millennial. We're going to dive deep into public health topics and career journeys. You'll hear diverse career stories, absorb professional development and career strategies, get tips, while also learning from others to help you in your own journey and learning of public health. Learn about the vast world of public health careers, or just hear public health stories. Stay tuned so we can do our part towards a culture of health, well-being, and equity for all. Welcome to episode 117. Hi everyone, Omari Richards here, and I'm so excited to be back with Public Health Careers, the rebranded version of the Public Health Millennial Career Stories podcast. I hope you all are excited as we continue to share my platform to tell great public health stories, learn about different public health topics. So be sure to subscribe if you have not as yet. Leave a review, share with a friend. Greatly helps. Thank you so much. Today's episode is a great one to start back off with this new rebrand. First time I'm interviewing someone with a JD and an MPH, and I think she shares some great insights. Regardless if you want to get a JD or not, I think she gives you some good takeaways on how you can get involved in the policy realm as a public health professional. And I'm glad to be telling this story. It's an exciting and insightful one, so I hope that you all enjoy. Today, we have a public health lawyer with executive leadership experience focusing on health policy, legislation, and government relations. She first got her bachelor's in English from Princeton University, followed by a bachelor's in microbiology at the University of South Florida. She then went on to get her Juris Doctor, or JD, at Stetson University College of Law, during which she got her Master of Public Health at the University of South Florida. She currently works as a director of Southeastern Region for the Network for Public Health Law. We have Dawn Hunter, JD MPH. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Truly is my pleasure. I don't get to talk to many people with a JD and an MPH, so I'm really excited to have you on the show and for you to share a lot more about your experience.
Oh, I'm excited to share, and we have a large community of public health lawyers, and so I'm excited to share a little bit more about what we do.
Awesome. So tell me how you doing and how you've been coping during these times.
I'm doing well overall. I'm one of those people who really enjoys working from home, and I have found that I feel, less stress overall, and have been able to maintain kind of wellness routine that works for me. I really love to get out and walk, and I've been doing outdoor fitness activities, and that's really helped me kind of to maintain balance. And I also have a really good group of friends, and so overall, I would say, doing well. It is I think the longer it goes on, like, it is more of an adjustment. I've worked in an office most of my life, and so it's definitely been a big change.
I was just going to ask about that because you said like you like the work from home life, so I'm not sure if that was the situation before the pandemic started, but it doesn't seem like it wasn't, but it seems like it is something that you really enjoy now.
Yes, I have pretty much always worked in an office or a laboratory, or a building that I had to go to. So this was a new experience for me, but it's been really good overall. I know that's not the case for everyone, but I have enjoyed it, and I feel pretty productive, really. And I do a lot of writing and research, and so it's nice to have kind of just quiet space at home to do that.
Yeah, no complaints there at all. Awesome. So tell me, how do you identify, and then tell us a little bit about your personal background.
Yeah, I am mixed race. I identify as a Black woman, and my pronouns are she, her. I grew up in the military, in a military family. My parents were both in the Air Force, and that's how my parents met. And my mom eventually left the Air Force and became a nurse. And my brother is now a nurse as well. And I mentioned the military because it really influenced me growing up. We moved around. I got to experience different states and different peoples, which I really appreciate about the way that we grew up. But I call New Mexico home. That is where my dad retired when I was in middle school, and so I grew up there. And that's really where all my memories and kind of formative time where it was spent. And then I have spent most of my adult life in Florida, in the Tampa Bay area, and so Florida is my second home. That's where I'm currently based, and I really love it. They're two obviously very different states, but they both have so many things about them that I think are have been an important part of my life. So I think that's it. Oh, and I love soccer. I play soccer, and that's how I met my husband, actually.
That's awesome. Well, I play a lot of soccer too. Well, not right now because I have a potential fracture or hairline fracture in my tibias, so I'm waiting to get an MRI done. But yeah, I love soccer. And then the first place that I came across and moved to in the US was Tampa as well. So that's awesome. That's where you
Oh,
are.
hey, that's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a pretty cool city, and it has developed a lot since I went to school there, and to this day, it's really awesome right now, I think.
It has changed so much, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's like a whole different city from when I went there. Yeah. So what does public health mean to you? Now, a quick break from our show sponsor. Have you been interested in connecting with a community of people who are passionate about community health while working on improving their own personal well-being? Well, lucky for you, the Community Health and Wellness Discord server is where you want to be. It's a free online community I co-created just for people like you. You'll find friendly people talking about important public and personal health topics, asking amazing questions, sharing valuable information, while connecting with each other to build a better culture of well-being, personally and at the community level. Join this free online community by going to thephmillennial.com/join. That's thephmillennial.com/join. See you there. Now back to the show.
Yeah, I thought about this, before we got on the call, and I really think at a fundamental level, to me, public health is about how to create the conditions for healthy children, family, and communities, and community at large too, like our community as in this country, but even smaller levels of communities. And it's also about, for me and the work that I do, the systems that create health. And so that's very much why I'm interested in law and policy and why I decided to go to law school, because I do think that policy ultimately shapes, health outcomes, and I wanted to have a hand in helping to shape that. And I guess what else I would say is that I really appreciate public health. I was trying to think of a way to describe it, like the silent, like foundation, right? Like the reason that we have healthy people and healthy communities and safe workplaces and safe food to eat is because of public health. And I think we don't often get a lot of recognition or credit for the role of public health in our life expectancy today, and the way that our communities look. But I really appreciate that. I love history, and I was thinking, I read this, one of my favorite books that I read when I was working in the lab is 12 Diseases That Changed the World. I don't even know if it's in publication anymore, but it was a super cool book because it really made me think about the way that not just these communities were changed and these countries often were changed by these major diseases, but also the way that the health and public health community responded also shaped kind of what we experience today. So that was a very long-winded answer, but that's public health for me.
Absolutely. And I think like it encompasses so many different things. And to your point, you getting the JD and your perspective on how to influence public health from that perspective, I think is something that I'm excited to get more into, as well as how you like what determined that that thought process of going into getting the JD to do this work, because I know that that's important. But yeah, public health is fundamental in so many different things. Like I got a text from my dad the other day, asking about like criminal justice and how public health should be a fundamental part of fixing criminal justice, or really focusing on social determinants of health and really like focusing on those primary things. And I was like, yes, I'm glad that he's talking about this with his friends, because I don't think that was a thing before. So I hope that there are more conversations like that around public health, because it basically is the basis for health in so many different ways. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm glad to hear they're talking about that too, in the criminal legal system. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So now getting into your collegiate story here. So you got your bachelor's in English at Princeton University. So what was the thought process behind that?
Well, I always did really well in English in high school, and so I kind of it was a I was naturally led toward a degree in English, but I probably, if I did it over again, I probably would have been either a psych major or a chemistry. I was those were really strong subjects for me. And when it came time to declare a major, so lesson learned. When it came time to declare, I didn't have one of the classes I needed to declare psychology, and so that's why I ended up declaring English. But it was a natural fit for me. I've been a reader my whole life. I love to read. I'm super analytical, so it made sense. One of the things that people probably don't realize is that even though I was an English major, I continued to take a lot of psychology and other science classes while I was in school as electives. And I actually worked in laboratories while I was at Princeton as an undergrad. And so when we get to talking about how I ended up working in a laboratory, it's not as much of a leap, because I actually spent a lot of time working in laboratories as an undergrad, and got to kind of still get that science kick in there, even though I ended up being an English major.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's a good note for people who are currently in their schooling. Make sure you're making sure you get those prerequisites that you need to get the major or the degree that you need,
Yes.
because it's definitely something. But I guess in hindsight, like it wasn't that big of a factor in you. Like maybe it was crushing at that point in time, but it seems like you were able to become very successful and do a lot of great work without the chemistry or the psychology per se.
I appreciate that. I did, I think, ultimately work out, and I think it was really about being able to demonstrate the skill sets for the things that I was pursuing. And because I had that diverse educational experience too, I think that helped. Even continuing to take those classes from different subjects, I thought was really helpful when I first started out figuring out what I wanted to do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I also like the point of you saying that you continue to take the psych classes even though you're an English major, so you're still developing that skill set. And that's one of the things that I like about the North American schooling system, is that you're allowed to get like a breadth of knowledge depending on how you decide you want to take the classes and different things like that once you're taking your prerequisites and taking the classes that go specifically to your degree. So that's awesome. And I'm not too sure. So I have two positions that we're going to talk about as one. So team leader slash case manager at the Children's Home Incorporated, and then adoptions case manager at Commonwealth Community Care Incorporated. Were these during your bachelor's degree or after you graduated, or what's the time process there? And then tell me a little bit more about how you came across it and what you do in them.
Yeah, so these both were after I graduated, and in fact, the children's home was well, I am there was even an earlier position, but the children's home was the first kind of long-term position I had out of undergrad. How that came to be is I had done a lot of volunteer work with at-risk youth while I was in school, and I had taken this career quiz at the time that was like, how to figure out what to do with your life. And one of the things that it suggested is like, what do you like to do? Like, how do you spend your volunteer time? How do you spend your free time? And so I started thinking about how I did so much work with at-risk youth. So I started looking for careers that would allow me to do that. And so I interviewed for a job in Florida. Actually, my very first job was with Eckerd Youth Alternatives, which is a wilderness reform camp. They actually have camps up and down the East Coast. I think they're still operational. And then I eventually transitioned from there to the children's home, where I started out on the residential foster care side, and then I worked my way up to eventually be one of the team leaders. And then I was a case manager, foster care case management. And then within that same system of care, so we had this kind of big umbrella organization, I became a foster care adoptions case manager. So that was the last kind of position I held in the child welfare system. I was really interested in how to create healthy families and children. And so I was really drawn to that. I also myself, I grew up I had a difficult childhood and grew up in domestic violence situation, and with, financial limitations. And I thought that I had been fairly successful, even though I was, in my early 20s at that point in time. And I wanted to be able to help other children to also be successful who had similar circumstances or background to me. So that's really what led me into working in that field. What I will say is that I became very kind of disenchanted with the whole field overall. It's a very difficult job to have, especially as a case manager. And you often have a high caseload. You're dealing with really wild situations sometimes. And it can be very stressful. And I also felt like when I was in adoptions that I wasn't really making the difference that I wanted to make. I think that there is great value in being a case manager. You're helping individual children and families, but I was really looking at the system and saying, this system is terrible. How do we fix that? And I said, what kind of a job can I get that allows me to fix the system, really? And that's kind of how I started to transition away from that line of work.
Okay, that makes sense. And very, very like public health lens coming in, seeing, okay, well, I'm doing this, but there's so many things that the system needs to change in order to make rules of other case managers and give the kids and other people a better chance or less trauma in within the process. And there are a lot of things and barriers that I'm guessing you had to deal with, or the clients or kids or children, however you want to call it, had to deal with at that point in time. But yeah, I'm glad that led you to think more like upstream, more systems level, which I think is important as well. And going back to, so you went to your bachelor's wanting to be a psychology or chemistry major. What was your thought process like coming out? Did you know we wanted to go through like case management, or was it just that quiz that you took that was like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do?
I really, another probably tip I would, and I'm sure other people have said this, is I should have relied on advising more than I did. I really didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated. I went in thinking I wanted to be a doctor and go to medical school, which a lot of my classmates did. And ultimately, that was really not the path for me, but I wasn't really clear right away on what that path was. So it really was kind of looking at my experience working with children that led me into that career at first.
Makes sense. And I think that's an important point of like just direction and like knowing, okay, I want to help kids, let me do that and go from there and see how I can like shift or pivot. And as you said, like you learned more about the systems issues, the upstream, and that was something that interests you more. And while you're thinking about that, you got another bachelor's degree in microbiology at the University of South Florida. So tell me, what's the thought process for going through another bachelor's degree and with microbiology too?
Yeah, so the way that happened is I really wanted to kind of leave the position I was in, but I wasn't really sure how to get into policy work or systems work. And so I wanted to really just get a job that would support me while I tried to figure it out. And all of my credits from my first degree transferred. And so I really just had to do another year's worth of work specific to the degree to get that second degree. And I did it because, like I said, I worked as an undergrad in laboratories. And so it was a way for me to pursue something I really enjoyed, which was microbiology. And to kind of pick back up on the science. And I really did start out just thinking it was going to be a way to sustain myself while I tried to figure out what I wanted to do. But it ended up being just a really great decision for me because I got exposed to public health, and I got to take classes and alternative careers, and in microbiology, and that really got me thinking about. I knew I didn't want to work in a lab forever, and so I started to look at what are some other options for people who are interested in science. I also was still interested in kind of working with families and children. And so I wanted to explore how to combine those interests. But I really enjoyed working in the lab and built a lot of great experiences there. And while I was there, then decided to pursue even more schooling.
Yeah, and we will get into that in a bit. But I think it's always fascinating to hear how someone came across public health and got into that part because as I mentioned in the intro, you do have your master's of public health, which came later on. But you said that you got exposed to public health during your this degree in microbiology at USF. So how how did you get exposed? What was that experience that really said, okay, public health is a thing, is a field that I can get into and do work around?
Well, the lab I worked in was the Advanced Biosensors Laboratory, which was a part of the College of Public Health at the University of South Florida. And so that was how I really got familiar with just the public health program at USF and as a field, what that was. And we were housed with several other labs where they were doing lots of really interesting research, virology, vectors, all kinds of really interesting stuff was going on. So that was how I got exposed to that. And it ultimately influenced me. My concentration for my MPH was global infectious disease, and I was surrounded by people who were working on infectious disease in some way. I will add, though, that I one of the things I like to share, to go back to my case management position, is I really think of child welfare as being the social determinants of health. I didn't hear that term until probably even after I graduated, got my master's, or at some point during that time. But all the things that we call the social determinants of health now were like what the families I was working with were dealing with. And so I had parents who had substance use disorder and who were going through treatment. We had people who were incarcerated and were trying to return and get jobs and find transportation. We had people who had to take parenting and anger management classes and develop social skills and were pursuing employment. And so these are all things that we know create healthier people. And so I really got that exposure to just what are people experiencing in their day-to-day lives. And then I spent this kind of time period in the laboratory just learning about just the science. And I focused on detecting food and waterborne pathogens. And our lab was primarily funded by the Department of Defense, which is a little bit different because the lab was set up after, I think it was after 9/11. I might have my time frame slightly wrong, but was partly in response to those events and doing research to help kind of identify rapid detection methods for our soldiers in the field. And over time, the focus shifted to have more commercial applications. But I thought it was really interesting because it was about like, how do we protect food and water sources? And then, as I said, I got to kind of explore alternative career options while I was working in the lab. So that's started me down the next path.
Okay. What were some of the alternative career options that they exposed you to?
Well, one of the main ones was regulatory work, which is part of how I ended up looking into law school, because we were doing water quality testing and we were testing food. And those are both things where standards are set by either the EPA or the USDA. And so I was really interested in kind of the regulatory framework for what we're doing. I don't think people realize there's a certain amount of contamination that's acceptable in your water and your food, right? Most people don't know that. But I was also interested in how those standards were established and why, and how they have to be followed. And so that was one. But I also, a lot of people in science, instead of staying in the academic side, go into industry, right, or go into private business. They may run labs, but in the private sector, which I think is very different than working in a lab setting, in an academic lab setting.
Thank you. And yeah, I think it's always good when any type of school or program is able to like give you exposure to different career paths. I feel like, especially in public health, this is why I have this podcast. It's like no one told me about all the different opportunities that they were out there. No one told me that they were JDs with MPHs out there doing cool policy work and all this stuff. So I'm happy and I advocate for like that kind of exposure to different career paths, especially in a field that is just so wide and broad. So I'm glad that you got that type of experience there, and it led you down the path to get your JD, which we'll talk about next. So you got your Juris Doctor at Stetson University College of Law. So what was your thought process behind this?
So I was working at the lab when I decided to go back to school, and I was starting to think at that point in time about going back to my original goal of how do I influence policy. So I started exploring programs. I knew I didn't want to get a PhD. That was not the life for me. And I didn't want to be a doctor or anything like that. And so I started just exploring, well, how do I get into policy? What do I need to do? And that's when I came across JD MPH dual degree programs. There are a number of them across schools across the US. And At the time, USF and Stetson Law had just established an agreement to have a joint degree program. And I will say, one of the things I heard most often is you don't have to have a law degree to work in policy. That is true. I do find that it's been beneficial in terms of just the academic experience, that you get as in law school. Just you see things, I think, in a different way. So I think it's been super valuable. But yeah, so then I started looking at those programs. I ultimately applied to several, but I wanted to stay in the St. Pete, Tampa Bay area. And that's why I ultimately decided on the Stetson USF program. So I actually continued to work in the lab while I was in school. So I did I did my first year of law school, and then I did my master's. I did 42 credit hours, I believe, in 1 year. I don't recommend that. And I think that was part of because they were still trying to figure out the structure of the joint degree program at the time. So I think it's been worked out since then. And then I finished my last 2 years of law school.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And then like to this point of knowing that you don't particularly need a JD to make an impact in the field of like policy, what was your onus for wanting the dual degree of the JD and the MPH?
So I think ultimately it was about having a really comprehensive understanding of the law and legal structures and law as a mechanism to induce change. And I felt that that was something I could best get from going to law school. I also think I did a lot of political volunteer work when I was younger. And so I think back to the people who were elected officials at the time that I was in school, a lot of them were lawyers. And so that really influenced me in terms of deciding to go to law school. And I knew throughout my time in school that I wanted to work in policy rather than go into traditional practice. And I think that that's not a common, career path. Certainly, most people don't go to law school to go work in policy. But that's how I ended up there.
That makes sense, and I completely understand that thought process and just rounding out the entire experience and really setting yourself up. Because I also have like a few friends that I went to the organization that they're working for, but they work in DC, and they're going back to school to get either their PhD or their DRPH because everyone at the next level has that, and they're finding it as a barrier just having the MPH doing this policy work. So that's just something to think about for people that are listening. Just think about what is the terminal thing that you're trying to do, and is the MPH something that is going to get you where you need to go? Is there going to be additional things, and you're going to add to that? I'm thinking.
I am. So I was going to say one pivotal conversation I remember now, just when you were talking, is that I did, while I was doing my micro degree at USF, I worked in an undergraduate laboratory, which was an amazing experience. And it's actually how I ended up finding the job at the Advanced Biosensors Laboratory. But one of the grad students who was in the lab with me, so I think, people probably know, but you have, your undergrad students, your grad students who are in a lab, you have the lab director or PI. So one of the grad students was finishing her MPH and she did not want to get her PhD. And I remember talking to her about that. And she said, for what she wanted to do, her experience and her understanding was that getting something beyond an MPH wouldn't have been valuable to her. And that also really made me think about, at the time I was still kind of like, do I get a PhD or what? And now, the DRPH, I think for people who are considering that, I think what you say is a great point. What is your end game really? And do you need that certain advanced degree to get there?
Yeah, and to add to that, like just ask people in the field and see what they're coming up against, whether they have that MPH or the MPH in another degree, to see if they are where they want to be and if that's where you want to be, and see if that matches with your path, and then going from there, I think is the best way to go about it, because we never know how it's gonna go, but having the most amount of knowledge at your fingertips, I think is the best bet in making your path the most clear going forward. But we know how life goes sometimes as well. So,
right.
Yeah. So how long did the JD MPH take? Was it like 5 years, 6 years?
I did it in 3.5, and that's because
Wow.
law school is typically 3 years, and then the master's would have been 2, but I went to school in the summers also. So I ended up being able to finish. Did I say, no, did I say 3.5? It would have been 1, 2, 3, 4.5.
Okay.
Is that right? I don't know. My math is off right now. So I did 1 year of law school. I did a full year of master's, and then I did another 2 years of law school. So 4 years. But I graduated in an off semester. That's why I say a half. So I graduated in December as opposed to May or June, which is when most people for law school don't typically graduate in the first semester, or in the fall semester. Yeah, but it was really intense. I mean, I will say that because I did take classes every summer, and I worked part-time during that entire time as well.
Yeah, that definitely sounds intense, but I guess to your point, like you got it done, you put your head down and you trotted along for those few years to get it done as quickly as possible, which I know a lot of people try to do as well. So kudos to you for that.
Oh, thanks. It was rough, let me tell you. I mean, I took a lot of naps in my car in the parking lot between classes and drank a lot of Red Bull. I don't know if I can say your product name. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're free to say product names. If Red Bull wants to sponsor the podcast, just please reach out. Awesome. Okay, so while you were getting your JD/MPH, you also were a volunteer staff at the National Clearinghouse for Science, Technology, and Law. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Stetson Law is one of the law schools that has a pro bono requirement for graduation. And when I was in school, it was 30 hours. And so, so for me, I specifically sought out an opportunity that would allow me to bring in the science background, but also do some legal pro bono work. And Stetson maintains the National Clearinghouse for Science, Technology, and the Law. And so just in my free time, I did case summaries on different cases involving scientific issues. And so I ended up, I think most of the ones I remember were toxicology cases. So these were cases where somebody's, blood was tested for something. I had a few that were associated with weapons and analyzing the trajectory of bullets and things like that, but they all involve science in some way. And so I got to contribute these case summaries to the clearinghouse, which was a great experience, and one that I think was valuable just from understanding. I wanted to just be able to focus more on how science and the law intersect.
And I think that's cool that you're able to shape out that opportunity or look for an opportunity that both not only does like law stuff, but is also focused on the science. As you said, you have an interest in that as well. So that's cool. And you also had an internship at the AIDS Institute. So tell me a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, so this is a great memory for me because as I mentioned, I still worked in the lab. And when I was looking for my field placement requirement for my MPH, I was looking at a lot of like lab-based jobs or, companies. And I did talk to my advisor this time. And she said, you want to go into policy work, so maybe you should look for a field placement that does policy. And the AIDS Institute has an office here in Tampa, and they have an office in DC, and the Tampa office was looking for interns. And so I applied and worked that's where I did my field placement for my MPH. It was great. I worked on the communications director and with the I don't remember her title now, but it was like outreach. So she did a lot of their coordination for National HIV and AIDS Awareness Days with other partner organizations. And I also got to help at the time. Twitter was this fairly new thing, and I got to help with, setting up the account and helping to manage some of the social media content. And we also worked on creating these constituent contact forms. So, how to engage in advocacy around issues related to anything related, like the funding, access to medications, you name it. And so I was really fortunate to get to work with the team and get that exposure to some of the advocacy side of policy work.
Yeah, that definitely sounds awesome and great advice from your advisor. If you want to do policy work for a policy organization.
Yeah. Yeah,
Awesome.
she was like, you're looking at a lot of lab work, which you already do. So yeah, so it was great. And I'm glad I talked to her about that.
Yeah, and like to that point, like sometimes we're just so ingrained in the work that we're doing, we just forget things that maybe like so obvious, but aren't obvious because we're in the work. So as I said before, like just talking to people and having other perspectives is helpful in figuring out what's the best next step for your journey. So yeah, that makes sense. You were also a federal judicial externship at the US. You had a federal judicial externship at the US District Court in Alabama. Tell me about that experience.
Yes. So while I was in school, one of the things you do in law school is also explore what your legal career path can look like. And so and actually the next position, which I think, is on your list, both the externship that I did and the internship I did with the city of St. Petersburg were aligned with my interest in figuring out what I really wanted to do after I got out of law school. And I had some friends who had worked in the federal judicial system. And so I was interested in exploring what that would look like to be a clerk. And a lot of people do that after law school. And so I actually had a position. I split my summer between the Northern District of Alabama in Birmingham and the Southern District of Alabama in Mobile. And really you're writing opinions and report and recommendations for the judge that you're assigned to. That was a very eye-opening experience in the sense that I realized that's not what I wanted to do long term. And so, but I thought it was really interesting work to help me understand the law more and the process more for, how opinions get written and published. I think that was really valuable. And, but then on a personal note, it was also valuable because I got to spend part of my summer in Birmingham, and I got to do the civil rights tour there. And I got to meet some freedom riders, and I got to see just see all these different kind of monuments and landmarks. And it was just really just moving for me. And I think maybe I would say then it's probably an early spark of interest in more social justice kind of work. And mostly that started out as volunteer work. I get to do more of that now in my current role. But it was really valuable both professionally, and understanding where I wanted to be in my career path, but also just the experiences I had living in Birmingham really shaped me.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And I think to that point, the experience is valuable in itself if it teaches you that this is not something that I want to do long term, which I think is a great thing to know before you like get out into the actual world and you're like actually getting a real job. And this is great to know.
I tell people that all the time for any job. One of the most important things you can know is what you don't want to do. I mean, a lot of people don't know the answer to that question. And I think it's a really important one.
It is. And like to that point, go out there and get experiences, dip your toes into different things and see what you like, what you don't like, and then shape how you want to move forward from there.
Yes. Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so you graduated from your JD and your MPH. Is there any advice that you would give someone that is going into a dual degree, JD, MPH? And then I guess, is it a lot of writing and reading?
Yes. My MPH was not. I mean, there was writing, but not nearly the level of writing and reading that you do in law school. I needed to work. So this for me was a second career going to law school, and I supported myself. And so I had a need to work. I would say, the school environment and the funding environment for education, of course, is very different from when I was in school. But I think really trying, to find balance in a way, like how do you manage your caseload, your course load, I should say, in a way that works for you and you can stay healthy, physically and mentally. I did, I made it through, but I definitely look back on that time, and maybe it's because you feel like when you're younger, you just are invincible in some ways. But I managed on very little sleep sometimes. Yeah, I mentioned the Red Bull. I probably would have liked to have a little bit more of a healthy lifestyle than I did. But yeah, and I would say be prepared to find a time to do the reading and writing, whatever it is that you have to do, at a time of day that works for you. I think I didn't realize until I was a little bit older just how much how much better I function in late afternoon and early evening. So for me, those are optimal times to do any kind of analysis and writing. I'm not the person that's going to get up at 9 a.m. and start, writing a treatise. That's just not going to happen. And I think knowing that about yourself is really important, because you should also plan your work around your own, habits, right? And understanding, how you function best and where you don't function as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people lack that self-reflection and understanding to know, oh, this is like, as you said, like this time of day is when I'm functioning best or when I have the most amount of energy or whatever the case might be to knock out those hard things. Some people are night owls, other people morning birds. I don't know if that's the correct saying, but everyone knows what I mean there.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so yeah, know what your body needs and like really just use that to do your best as you go forward, which I think is very important. So I appreciate that insight as well. Okay, so you graduated from the JD MPH, and you got a public health law fellowship at the New Mexico Department of Health. So tell me a little bit about that and how'd you come across that, or how'd you get into that position?
Yeah, so after I finished law school, I kept working in the lab while I looked for jobs. I did some temporary contract attorney work, and then I also was studying for the bar, which I took in, I think, February of 2013, the February bar. So the bar is offered twice a year. And so I worked and was looking for jobs, and I don't remember how this came to my attention. I was looking at fellowship opportunities, and so this probably was just on my list because I was actively looking for fellowships. And this one was actually funded by the Network for Public Health Law, which is where I work now, which is kind of fun. And it was I was in the second cohort of young, recently graduated attorneys who were placed in my cohort. We were all placed in state or local public health agencies. I think in the first cohort, there was more of a mixture, like some of them were in academic settings. But in mine, at least, we were in health departments. And the idea was to have kind of skills-based learning experience in public health law. And so I applied. I had to select, I think, 2 locations. And I matched with Santa Fe, New Mexico, which was great because I'm from New Mexico, so it was nice to get to go home. And so I joined the department for a 1-year fellowship. And then I was assigned partly to the Office of General Counsel and then also to the Office of Policy and Accountability, which managed all the policy and legislative work for the department, as well as things like public health accreditation and the Office of Health Equity. And so at the end of my time there, at the end of my fellowship, I remember, and I don't know how, if all fellowships are this way, but they were like, basically plan on the fellowship ending and, not having a permanent job. You need to be, make sure you find something to do when the fellowship's over. But I was fortunate to be hired full-time by the Department of Health. And that's how I ended up staying there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And shout out to you for getting the fellowship. And yes, that I know a lot of fellowships don't guarantee a job afterwards, but I guess you made the case for the work that you did that you were valuable and they should hire you. So they hired you into Deputy Director for the Office of Policy and Accountability, and I think also Director of Office of Health Equity. So what do you do in those positions, or was it just scaled up work that you did as a fellow?
And now a quick break from our show sponsor. Do you care about public health and health equity? Have you been looking for value-based apparel? Well, the Public Health Store has got you covered. Rock simple value-based design apparel that will surely have others interested in engaging in meaningful conversations with you. The Public Health Store has apparel for you to rock in class, around the office, or just casually around town. Wear your values where people can see them. Visit the Public Health Store at thephmillennial.com/shop. That's thephmillennial.com/shop. And use the code podcast for 10% off your next order. Okay, now back to the show.
No, it was different work than I did as a fellow. So as a deputy director of the office, my director at the time was kind of working toward retirement, and I think wanted to have a plan for succession of the office after she left, which I think, of course, every good office should have a succession plan. But that office was really responsible for 2 core things, which was the public health accreditation work and managing the legislative session, policy development for the health department. And so I supported both of those projects or initiatives, if you will. And when I joined the department, actually as a fellow, we were going through our first accreditation. So we're in the reaccreditation. The New Mexico Department of Health is in the reaccreditation process now, but we were trying to go for it when I first joined the team. And so it was a lot of work. I worked on Domain 6, which is law, under the FAB standards and measures. And and then continued to do that work as the deputy director. And then as director of health equity, we had a very small team. And so we had to really be strategic about, how we spent our time. And so really the first thing I did was try to develop a mini strategic plan, if you will, for, how we do health equity work as part of this large, policy office where we were positioned in the agency. We had 3 full-time employees, really. So, I mean, that's not a lot of employees to be doing health equity work. And we were a centralized health department, completely centralized in New Mexico. So we're a very large agency. And so I spent some time figuring out what we should be doing as a team. We kind of came up with a plan, and we started thinking about how we could help to inform policy work with a health equity perspective. And that looked like a lot of different things. We did a lot of really cool projects though. So we started developing a plan for medical interpreter training in both Spanish and Navajo because of the languages spoken, in our state. We also developed cultural competency trainings. We did a public health Spanish class that employees could go to on their lunch break. We really tried to beef up the workforce training and development piece of health equity. That was really one of the main areas that I wanted to focus on. And then we also had members of our team inform the legislative process. So as part of our bill analysis process during the legislative session, we had our team contribute to equity analysis of bills that were coming through. So will different populations be impacted, and if so, how? And so we had our team members help to contribute to those analyses.
That makes a lot of sense here. And this might be a little bit of an ignorant question, but I'm going to ask it because I think it helps other people understand. So tell me a little bit more about the offices. How are offices structured, and are they different? I'm guessing that they're going to be different for every different state. Is that true?
That is true. So a lot of health departments have a structure where you have department, and then under that level, you'll have something like division, and then you'll have bureaus, and then you'll have programs. And then you can have these random offices, which is what mine was. At one point in time, it was called a division, but it was a small team, and it became an office, and it was part of the office of the secretary. I will say that there is, in a lot of the state health departments, there is something equivalent to the office I worked in. I mentioned it was the Office of Policy and Accountability. There's an office like that in many other state health departments, and that has very similar responsibilities. So legislative activity, accreditation, and things like that. And in fact, I was ASTO, which is the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials, has a state legislative liaison peer network, and those are folks who were in the position that I was in. So anyone who was in that similar position, so it pretty much exists in most health departments, whether or not the office structure is the same.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I vaguely understand like the structure of health departments and stuff like that. I've never worked in one officially. Definitely think that's something that I should get someone to talk about more, just to understand it. Granted, it is like very different in every state, which is interesting in itself.
Yeah.
So you're planning for this succession of your director. So I'm guessing you shifted into that position as she shifted out. So you became the director of office, director for the Office of Policy and Accountability. So how did the role of your job change then?
Then it became much more of a leadership and management role. And so I had responsibility. I had budget responsibilities before, but then I had responsibility for the entire office as a director. I also had management of all the teams and oversight of some additional offices, including where I had been in charge of the Office of Health Equity before, it now reported to me. And as well as the Office of Border Health and the Office of the Tribal Liaison. So I really was kind of doing a lot more management work and kind of doing more implementation of our strategic plan, as opposed to doing kind of direct program work or anything like that. I did, though, continue to lead and develop our policy development and legislative process, which honestly is probably my favorite part of working at the department.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we have short sessions, and legislative sessions vary across the states. But what happens is, and this is this very similar process in most states, is bills get introduced in the legislature, if they're related to health in some way or public health, those agencies that are impacted can have input into the impact of the bill. And so they will send their analyses over to the legislature for consideration during committee hearings and then in the full vote of the Senate or the House. And so I led that process for our agency in terms of developing the analyses and sending them over to the legislature. So we had a wonderful team of people who were very talented. Most of them who worked on these analyses were not attorneys, by the way, just really talented folks in my policy office who were really great analyses. And then I reviewed all of those and made sure they get sent to the legislature. Occasionally I would testify as an expert witness on certain bills, or I organized expert testimony from other public health experts within our agency. So if there was a question about, like I say, I remember one year we had a bill that was related to rabies, and we had our state epidemiologist want to testify. And then we also had a role of creating fact sheets and talking points to give to legislators so they could really understand the work that we did at the health department, and understand why we were talking about the bills that we were and the impact that they would have.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, I can see why that's something that you're excited about, because it seems like it's a lot of great work that you're doing there. And before we move on to your next role, I wanted to ask, because you said in this director role, you did a lot more management than it seems like you did in earlier parts of your career. So how did you develop that skill set of management?
I thought it was important to connect with other leadership members, team members in the department, and to really understand their career paths and understand their journey and understand how they managed their areas. So I met with a lot of the division directors and bureau chiefs to really understand what they did and work. And then I also I ask a lot of questions. It's just my nature. I'm the kind of person that questions everything, and I think that was helpful in the sense of understanding process. And so I was never afraid to seek out information, just wanting to understand how things were done the way they were done, why they were done that way. And I spent a lot of time looking at policy. I think it's important, if you have really good organizational policies, it can really drive a high functioning workforce. And so I thought it was important to also just be familiar with the requirements that we had on us for whatever it might be, training, time reporting, whatever it was, just really understanding the requirements behind those things that we did every day.
That makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. And then after this, you shifted into a deputy cabinet secretary position. So tell me a little bit about that role.
So while I was the director of the Office of Policy and Accountability, my position was reclassified. And what that means is that it was changed to an exempt position under the governor's office, which made it's changed the status of the position. And so many of the high level positions at the health department, and this is true for most states, are appointees of the governor as opposed to having to apply through the non-exempt process. And so my position changed. So I was already, I became the appointee in that director role for the Office of Policy and Accountability. And then we were unfortunate to lose our cabinet secretary unexpectedly. She passed away. And so things shifted internally, and a deputy position opened up, and I was appointed to that position. And so that I was over the programmatic side of the department. So I oversaw all of the public health division, epidemiology, the state laboratory, health facilities licensing and regulation. And then I continued to also oversee the policy office.
Okay, that makes sense, and very interesting and intricate world of government, for sure. And then you shifted back into the director for the Office of Policy and Accountability after this. So tell me a little bit about how that happened, and then I guess just share more about that.
Well, one of the downsides of being a political appointee is that when the political environment changes, so does your job. And so the governor I worked for at the time, which was Governor Susana Martinez, she was termed out. And so there was an election, and Governor Lujan Grisham, who is the current governor, took over. And what typically happens when when the governorship changes is employees who are working for the previous governor are asked to leave. And so sometimes they will get rehired. And then in my case, I did, but not always in the same role or with the same agency. So in my case, there were already people who were identified for the deputy secretary, cabinet secretary roles. And I was appointed back into the director position of the Office of Policy and Accountability, which I had been very familiar with. And I think timing wise, it was great because, you know, she took over as governor at the start of a legislative session, and I had been running the legislative session work for the health department. So I think it created some continuity to be able to go into that position at that point in time, because it was just right at the beginning of the administration. People are still trying to figure out what they're doing and who's where, and they're filling roles. And it's a very busy and kind of chaotic time in some ways. And then all of that's happening, you know, a new governor is taking over and all of their new team coming in while the legislative session is going on. So it's really intense, but I think, you know, it worked out well. And then after the legislative session ended, I started looking at just opportunities to maybe do something different.
That makes sense, and I could imagine how that would be chaotic, and that those changes happening very like drastically could be, I don't know, maybe overwhelming a bit, and getting used to like a new team, new structures, or all these things, new goals that the new governor would want. And I think it's all things that people have to like take into consideration when they are in these types of roles. Because I know, for example, the CEO of the organization I work for, she resigned when the governor in North Carolina changed because just wasn't gonna essentially they're just gonna like backtrack all the work that she tried to do to forward. So it's just can be hard sometimes.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind, people.
It can be hard. You have to make a choice too. I mean, a lot of people don't, even if they're super qualified, don't choose to go into or don't want to be considered for, I should say, those political appointments, just because there's a lot more uncertainty associated with them. And then again, when the environment changes, you know, you may find yourself doing nothing that you wanted to be working on, or completely different goals, or that, you know, as you were describing. So it's, you know, there's a lot to consider there, whether or not that's the right path for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one thing that you mentioned a little bit earlier throughout these various roles was that you worked with a lot of people in the policy process that didn't have JDs. So what advice, because I'm guessing that there are a bunch of MPH people or people who are getting their MPHs right now that probably are interested in doing policy work but aren't interested in getting a JD. What advice would you give to them to position themselves to do policy level or policy type work?
I would say definitely make sure that your coursework allows you to have a really good understanding of the policy development process, and even just the way that like the legislative process works, the way that agencies are structured. Those are all really helpful if you want to work in policy, especially if you want to work in a health department. I think so. You understanding how health departments are shaped, how they're funded, what kind of requirements might be on them because of their funding, you know, so any coursework that helps you to understand that better. And then any kind of internship or volunteer placement experience that you can get, I think is also really helpful, to look at policy-oriented organizations, to take advantage of those opportunities. I will say that, you know, most of the people on my team had an MPH, and we had 2 epidemiologists, so that was their specialty. I had a couple who had like program planning. What is that one called? That track?
Social behavioral sciences type track.
Yeah. So we had a mixture of MPHs in my office, and I think they all brought something different to the table. The EPIs were great as part of the team because, you know, when you're doing bill analysis, you're often trying to say, you know, what is the real impact to people? What do the data show us? And so our EPI team members and our other team members, for that matter, did a really great job of helping to articulate, you know, tell the story behind the data, if you will, when we were doing these kind of bill analyses. And then throughout the year, you know, they helped us on other things, including accreditation. New Mexico is a performance-based budgeting state, and so we had a lot of reports that were due because of that, on whether or not we were meeting our health targets. And all of the people in my office helped contribute in some way to that process.
Awesome. That's great advice. So I appreciate that. And then after these roles, you shifted into or you moved into a senior director of policy, strategy, and legal services at Foundation for a Healthier St. Petersburg. So how do you come across that, and what do you do in that role?
Well, that foundation was established while I was living in New Mexico. It is a health conversion foundation. So for folks who aren't familiar, it was created out of the sale of a nonprofit hospital. There's a requirement that those proceeds then go to some community benefit. So typically they establish foundations when those sales happen. And in this case, the foundation was dedicated and still has a mission to achieve racial equity in St. Petersburg. So I was really intrigued by their work and had explored an opportunity that was available there. The position didn't really exist at the time. And so I really just kind of through a series of negotiations and interviews and kind of this position was crafted. And I was looking for an opportunity to move back to Florida too, which is where I had been living before I started my fellowship and then ended up staying at the health department. And so I really wanted to come back to St. Pete. And this was a great opportunity that presented itself at the time.
And what did you do in that crafted position that you made for yourself?
Well, I ended up actually not doing most of the things in my title, which is funny, but I oversaw the data and evaluation team and a lot of the tech work. We had mostly contractors to do our tech work, IT type things. And so the systems that we used to enter client information, track our client contacts, which is very important in the nonprofit world, of course, and then just metrics on the work that we were doing. So while I was working there, we opened a facility called the Center for Health Equity that was designed to have programming and create space for people to really work on different ways to advance racial equity, whether that's through community conversations, through different projects. We hosted speakers, like all kinds of events. And so I was responsible for the team that also helped to evaluate basically what we were doing. I will mention that was somewhat consistent with what I was doing at the health department, is that I oversaw, the performance evaluation team. I mentioned performance-based budgeting. So a lot of that work is evaluation work. And so it was natural to do that. And, but really, I didn't want to be doing data and evaluation. I love data. If you hear me, most lawyers would not say that. But I do, but it's not something, going back to knowing what you like and don't like, it is definitely not something that I want to do all the time. I definitely don't want to do evaluation work all the time. And so I just felt like that wasn't the right fit for me. And so I started kind of exploring other options to really kind of hone back in on the policy side of things. Like I mentioned, I really loved the legislative work, and that's something that still sticks with me. They say trust your instincts and trust your heart. Like, I just love that work so much, and being able to read bills and understand statute and understand the regulatory process. And so I wanted to get back into that more. And so that's kind of how I started to transition out of the foundation work.
That makes sense. And so did you get promoted to Chief Innovation Officer for a month and then you left? Is that what happened?
Yeah. The organization was shifting at the time, which also, was going through an internal reorg, which also kind of helped me kind of think about, is that where I still wanted to be? And I think anybody, if you're in an organization that's going through a reorganization process, you should definitely, think about, how do you continue to fit in with the organization, and is it the right path for you? For me, it wasn't. So I did have that role for a month. It was very similar to what I had been doing in my previous role, so it wasn't significantly different. Yeah, and then I left to transition to my current role.
Awesome. So you transitioned into because you transitioned into a deputy director at the Network for Public Health Law.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Okay.
My current organization.
Okay, so you moved into the organization at the Network for Public Health Law. You began your career here as a deputy director. So how do you come across this, and what did you do?
Yeah, I would really say it was serendipity in some ways. I ran into the director of the region at the time at a meeting, and he had this position open. And I, of course, knew the network because the network funded my fellowship, and I stayed connected to many of my colleagues over the years that were part of the network or had worked at the network at some point in time. So when I found out this position was open, I thought, oh, this is a great fit, because it was an opportunity, first of all, to work with Gene Matthews, who is, to me, a legend in public health law. And so I really was excited to work for him and learn from him, but also to really spend more time doing more research and analysis and kind of really helping to shape shape the practice of public health through law and policy. So I was really excited about the opportunity to join his team. And so I did. And it was funny because I accepted the position, and then I asked to delay my start date several months, and they agreed to that. And then the pandemic happened. So that changed. It was funny, who would have known at the time. But the pandemic happened. I was originally going to move to North Carolina, which is where our main office for the Southeastern Region is based, at UNC Chapel Hill. And then I didn't move because nobody was going anywhere. Everybody was at home. We all were working remote, and we didn't know what was happening. And then just it worked. Remote work worked for our organization. And so I've continued to work from home in St. Pete since then. But it was a really interesting transition, just kind of not expecting the pandemic, to happen. And then it changed, everything, and making that job transition during that time.
Yeah, kudos to you, because as you said at the beginning of the interview, you really enjoy that work from home life, which I think I also enjoy as well. And also kudos for you for advocating to take a couple of months before you start for the job, because I think that's one of the best things we can do, especially if you plan to just continue to have a career. Taking those breaks in between jobs, it's like awesome vacation time, but knowing that you're going to go into a new place, so just coming in refreshed, I think is an awesome way to look at it. So I'm glad that you did that for yourself. Unfortunately, the pandemic hit, but I guess it worked out. St. Peter's an awesome city as well. I think it's one of my favorite in Florida. I think it is my
Yeah,
favorite in Florida. So I would say that.
I love it. It's a great city. It's a great city. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I mean, that you mentioned that. I think I've always worked. And so it was the first time in my probably professional career that I was in a position to be like, I can take some time off and it's good for me. Yeah, and I did a lot of yoga and walking and reading books, and it was really restorative. Especially because I had come off of, right before the foundation, this really kind of stressful transition with the governor that I mentioned, with the governor changing and just the chaos of that, and then a cross-country move, and then going into this position, which was very intense. Also, to just say, oh, I need some breathing room. So it was really nice to be able to take that break. So I definitely say, if you're in a position to advocate for any amount of time, it doesn't have to be months, right? It could be take 2 weeks, take a week between jobs. Some people, it's like you give your 2 weeks notice and then you start your new job like the next Monday. You don't always have to do that.
Yeah, I think it's a missed opportunity if you're doing that. Then because most of the time, if they want you for the job, they will allow you to get that couple weeks to a month plus sometimes to take that break before you join them. So yeah, just advocate for it, and you never know what will happen. So you got promoted to your current role as a director for the Southeastern region. So how long were you in the deputy director position before you got promoted to the director position?
I was in the deputy position for about a year when I was promoted. And that was part of the plan because it kind of coincided with a new grant cycle. And I mentioned Gene Matthews. He also was kind of had his plan, right, to move back toward, I would say, second retirement. He actually retired from federal government and then worked at the network for the past 10-ish years since the network was founded. And so he was really being intentional about making sure he brought in a new team member, had somebody trained up and ready to take over. And so, yeah, that was about a year. And then Gene is actually still on my team as the principal investigator for the region. So he helps to manage some of the grant funds for our region. And then I do all of more of the management work, if you will, for the region now in the director role that I wasn't doing before. And that's really more like budget, but we don't have a large budget. I went the health department, my budget was in the hundreds of millions, and that's not what we have now in our organization. So it's very different, right? And then we have a much smaller team in the health department. We had 3,200 employees, and now I think our team is somewhere, around 50 or so.
That's awesome. And so you said that there was a plan to do this. Was there an interview process that you had to go through, anything like that, or was the plan set out that you would shift into this position in a certain amount of time as the organization restructured, or however that happened?
This was part of a plan that was originally set out to take over, so to train with Jean and then to take over the director role. So it was a pretty seamless transition in that regard, because I started being incorporated into kind of the leadership meetings and meetings with our national office team well before I actually stepped into the director role. And so it ended up being a very smooth transition. I think I'm not I think a lot of organizations, it depends on how they're structured, whether or not they have an external, application process and interviews or not. In my particular case for this particular role, that was not the case. But I took the deputy position with the understanding that it was part of a succession plan, right? So that was part of my emphasis for taking the job, was that there was a longer term plan that was more aligned with my skill set, which I think is in administration and management.
That makes a lot of sense, and awesome to always know when you're coming into a role that there's a plan for your career progression and more of what you would like to do in the near term future. So that's awesome. And then I guess transition to the next question: where would you like to see yourself in the future? So the next few years, what would be the ideal light that you see yourself in?
I really have thought about this question a lot. I'll start there, because I feel, I don't know, I have a lot of friends too who are kind of thinking about their career paths right now. So I don't know if it's just a general feeling that people have, if it's the pandemic or what it is, but I have thought a lot more about, what are my strengths and what really brings me joy. And I really lean into, I think, what I know my skills are. I've done several different, like a lot of people, I've done a lot of leadership assessments. I've done Myers-Briggs, and I've done the Working Genius and True Colors, and, all those. And I think they're all very consistent, which is my skill is in leadership, right? And in motivating people around projects. I'm a very skilled project manager. I've done project management training in the past. It's something that I enjoy. I enjoy kind of scoping things out and bringing them to fruition, and bringing people together kind of across different, offices, programs, institutions to do that work. So I think I have a very big systems perspective. So ultimately, long term, I want to be in a position where I get to do more of that kind of work. I want to be able to lead an organization toward really shaping health outcomes, toward really shaping a better, I call, legal infrastructure for health, right? And I hope that I can be in a position that allows me to do that, to really kind of, shape that organization to help lead and develop another generation of public health lawyers, and to help people, currently in the field, and to work collaboratively, I guess, to accomplish those goals. And so that was a long-winded answer, but but really, it's like, I know what my skill set is. I want to really be in a position where I get to exercise and flex those skills more. And recognize that, I think it's important to surround yourself, especially if you end up in a management or leadership position later in your life, is to surround yourself with people who have the skills that you don't have, and to have enough self-awareness to know what you can and cannot do. I think it's important to build a good team, and then to trust your team members to do their jobs. And so I hope to be able to take kind of my experience and my approach to leadership to somewhere.
Yeah,
I'm not sure where.
Well, I love that, and I look forward to seeing where you take your career, Dawn. And be sure everyone to connect with Dawn on LinkedIn so that we can all stay updated to where that is, and the great work that you continue to do. So I greatly appreciate that, and I'm glad that you know what your skill sets that you like are, and you want to position yourself to continue to do that work around those skill sets that you have proven expertise in. So that's awesome. Okay, so
Well,
moving you
thank
on.
you.
You're most welcome. You're most welcome. Moving you on to the last section of the show, the Furious Five, which are 5 questions I ask all guests. Um, So number one, what advice would you give to a student trying to pursue a career in public health?
I would say to network, go to student groups, go to meetings, go to talks, really try to expose yourself to as many different types of public health and professionals in public health as you can. So you get a very good sense of what you like and don't like and what interests you and what doesn't interest you. So I'm a very social person, but I would say it's super important to make those connections with people, both from your longer term kind of career perspective, but also to really just kind of get a sense of what people are doing. So go to those events, go to lunch and learns, do all of that stuff.
I absolutely love that. Number two, if you're talking to someone wanting to get into your position, what advice would you give them?
So one thing I didn't say when you asked me about how I developed my skills, moving into management and leadership, is I did do a lot of leadership training, and I was part of a leadership academy, and I think that was really important. So I think pursuing opportunities to grow professionally, so any kind of leadership trainings that you can do, especially if you know that you might want to manage people eventually. One of the things I think that we hear as a challenge in the public health workforce in general and governmental public health is that people often get promoted into management positions and don't really have skills as managers. And so if that's something you want to do or think you might end up in or interested in, definitely take the time to develop yourself as a leader.
Love that advice. And yeah, I think it's not something that is taught enough or even showing like how you can develop those leadership skills. So I appreciate you mentioning that. Number three, what's something you're working on improving in your life right now?
Oh, just personally,
Yeah.
I'm working on healthier eating. I eat very healthy. I am a cancer survivor, and that is something actually we didn't talk about, but that's also something I was going through at the end of the change in governor when I was at the state health department. And so I've been very conscious of how to live a healthy lifestyle, and both in terms of like what I eat and how much I exercise and staying mentally healthy. So for me, I have been really trying to just focus more on just eating. I don't want to say eating healthier because I eat healthy, but I have been working on just like how to eat in a way that fuels me better. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like I eat good foods, but I think, you have to really eat at the right time of day for you, at the right time for whatever activities you're doing. I have found, what works for me is doing smaller meals more frequently throughout the day. It doesn't work for everyone. But I've been really trying to figure that out. So that's something I still haven't figured out totally, but I am working on it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And shout out to you for beating cancer. And yeah, that's one thing that my partner tells me all the time is like you do all these activities, but you're not fueling your body properly. And I'm like, all right, I'll figure that out. So I've also been a lot more intentional in how I'm eating. And I think to your point, once again, like the self-awareness of what works well for my body and how do I like optimize that because we all are pushed all kind of like health knowledge and different eating and whatever, but it all is very individual in that perspective. Like how do I feel and what is the best way for me to move forward? So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, and I hope
Yeah.
that you're able to stay on track with whatever healthier eating means for you.
Thank you. Me
Okay,
too.
okay. Good, good. And then number four, professionally, do you recommend anything?
So I mentioned the book that I love, which is 12 Diseases That Changed the World. That's a great one. And I think you can still get it. Like I said, I don't think it's in print anymore, but it is, I have seen it on Amazon. I love the Hidden Brain podcast. I don't know if you listen to that one at all.
I've listened to
Um,
a couple of episodes.
yeah, so the reason I love it, and I mention it here, is that it is a podcast that's really, in my description is, it's dedicated to understanding the way that we, our behavior is driven, right, by our biology and like way our brains work. And it has particular relevance in public health, especially around communication. So I listen to a lot of these episodes and think about how we interact with other people and how we communicate with other people and how important communication is for law and policy. That we don't get to having good law and policy without really smart communication and smart advocacy work. And so I really appreciate this podcast because it helps me to think about better ways to communicate about the work that we do, better ways to apply kind of behavioral psychology to the work that we do in public health. So if you haven't listened to it, check it out. There's some really cool episodes there. And I think if you're into self-improvement, there are also just always great tips on there for how do you apply what you've just heard in your own life.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, definitely. I'll link that in the show notes. Anyone who wants to check it out, or you can just probably like search it anywhere and you can find the podcast. But yeah, I appreciate you sharing that as well. And then last but not least, where can people connect with you?
Yes, so please find me on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active. I try to post regularly on topics related to health and racial equity, kind of legal and policy issues related to structural racism, and then workplace things. I'm really interested in how we have healthier, more functional and equitable workplaces, and so I post on that as well. But please, connect with me there. I am on Twitter at Dawn Marie Hunter, one word, one long word, and those are really the two places I'm most active. You can also reach me by email at the network. And I'm always happy to connect with people. I talk to students all the time about my career path and just the work that I do and just what does it mean to work in public health law. So I'm always happy to have those one-on-one conversations as well.
Awesome. Well, I hope that there are a lot of people that reach out to you after this. Not an overwhelming amount of people, but a good amount of people that are able to reach out to you and ask you some more in-depth questions about your career path, because I definitely learned a lot. So I'm grateful that I got to have you on the show. So appreciate you sharing all your insights and telling us about your journey. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been really great.
Truly is my pleasure. So housekeeping items, everyone. Thank you so much for watching or listening to this. Be sure that you subscribe if you have not as yet. Leave a like, leave a 5-star review, and share it with a friend. Greatly appreciate you all, and you all will hear from me next week. Peace.